Good afternoon. It's Wednesday afternoon, April the 8th, 2020. I wanted to share a short devotion with you as we prepare to think about the Passion Week and Jesus' arrest and crucifixion, his burial, and then we'll celebrate the resurrection on the Lord's Day. If you have a Bible, I'd like for us to turn to Matthew chapter 27, verses 11 through 26. Meanwhile, Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Yes, it is as you say," Jesus replied. And when he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate asked him, "Don't you hear the testimony they are bringing against you?" But Jesus made no reply, not to a single charge, to the great amazement of the governor. Now it was the governor's custom at the feast to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. And at that time they had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked him, "Which one of you do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?" For he knew it was out of envy that they had handed Jesus over to him. And when Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him this message: "Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him." But the chief priest and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus executed. "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" asked the governor. "Barabbas," they said. "And what shall I do then with Jesus, who is called Christ?" And Pilate asked. They all answered, "Crucify him." "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him." And when Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said. "It is your responsibility." And all the people answered, "Let his blood be on us and on our children." And he released Barabbas to them. But he had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. You know, it's hard to read the Easter narrative, or what we call the Passion narrative, without getting a little bit angry. The entire event goes against our sense of mercy and justice. Here we see an innocent man not only arrested, but beaten, flogged horribly, and then later crucified. And it's been years since I've been hearing the story of Easter. I mean, I've been in church since I was a kid. I'm actually 51 now, so for so many years, and it still bothers me. You know, even when unbelievers watch The Passion of the Christ, it was produced by Mel Gibson, it moves them to tears because it just goes against everything about us, everything that's right. And it makes us angry. We want to do something about it. The characters bother us. We hear the high priest and the Jewish leadership, Judas, and then Pilate. And I want to focus for a few minutes on Pontius Pilate. He's a character that many have tried to embellish and, for lack of better words, get him off the hook as being one of the culprits in the story. Now we know that the entire event was God's will, that it had been planned out. I believe from the very beginning in the Garden of Eden, God knew he would have to do something to reconcile man because of his free will and his choices to sin. And so to get us back in relationship, he had to have a plan. And that's why Jesus gave his life for us. And I'll talk more about that on Sunday. But think about Pilate. Even if, as some say, they were pawns in God's divine system to save humanity or to reconcile humanity, he still had some free choices in the matter. And one of the things that bothers me the most when I read the gospel accounts of him is his attitude of indifference, his apathy towards the whole situation. Now, Josephus tells us that Pilate had a real problem with the Jews, that he was very insensitive, and he did things at times like put up images of Caesar in the temple area that just really bothered the Jewish population. Now, the Ethiopian and other churches have been reluctant to write Pilate off, and they actually consider him a saint. The Coptic Christians and the Ethiopian Christians, they venerate him as a martyr and a saint. They believe because of his wife's faith, he became a Christian later. This is their tradition. And having acted upon that, he became a follower of Jesus, and was what later on he was martyred. We don't know this from history, and it's certainly not given to us in the Word of God. But we do know that he seems to just be indifferent. He wants this whole situation to go away. You know, what happened to Jesus was not right, and he seems to be bothered by it. He's reluctant, and he finally gets an opportunity to get out of this situation. Someone suggests to him that they could let someone go, and that he could go out and tell the crowd, "You choose who you want." And that gets him off the hook, so to speak, and he can just symbolically wash his hands and be done with the whole situation. You know, I think a lot of people in the Lord's church, a lot of believers today are not much different than what we see in the actions of Pilate. And that's the question we should ask ourselves during this time. Is my faith sincere, or am I going through the motions? Am I playing church? You know, you could be a Christian who's been baptized and you come every Sunday, but you'd rather be somewhere else. You'd rather be doing something else. Maybe your wife, like Pilate's wife, sort of has to drag you along in your faith. Your mind's is miles away from what's going on at church, and there's no sort of spiritual activity going on the rest of the week. And that's a real concern that we should all have. You know, Pilate asked Jesus a few questions. Are you a king? And he seems to be a little concerned, but I don't think he really wants to bother with the whole matter. A Jewish historian named Josephus, who we can't always trust because he kind of embellishes the story at times to make himself look good and others, but he says that Pilate really did not want to deal with Jesus. He just didn't want to be bothered. He wanted to get out of Jerusalem, go back to Rome, and be considered a good ruler and get his reward from the Roman government and then retire. And maybe there's some Christians today that are just going through the motions and looking forward to one day retiring and going to heaven. And we need to be really driven and willing to investigate, to be involved. Pilate doesn't want to get involved. He wants to wash his hands of this whole event. Now, we've got a ton of people that work here at Central Christian Church and in the community that are very involved and very active in their faith. And that's to be commended. But we could sure use more people to do the same. There are a lot of Christians who just are missing in action. And I'm praying that during this time in which we've been separated by the government because of the COVID-19 virus, that we'll be more concerned about each other. You know, one of the things I've been noticing along the roads and in parking lots are these rubber gloves that are being thrown on the ground. You know, that tells me that someone just doesn't care. Yeah, they care about themselves, and they're worried about catching a virus and taking it home to their family possibly. But the fact that they would take the glove off and just pitch it to the ground wherever they are tells me, first of all, I don't care if this glove's contaminated and your kid comes along and picks it up. And I don't care about the environment. I don't care that this might wash down a drain somewhere and choke a poor turtle out in the ocean, or some seagull might get this caught over their head and suffocate. It just says, I don't care. It's the same attitude you see when someone leaves their grocery cart right next to them. Now I've gone to venting here, but we need to really consider, as we are thinking about coming back together in the near future, hopefully by next month at least, or maybe before, how we can fall more in love with Christ and become more fully involved in his kingdom, and not have the attitude that Pilate and so many others. You know, one of the things we can't say about one of the things we cannot say about the Jewish leadership or about Judas is that they didn't care. They were involved and they were passionate about what they were doing. So it's my prayer that you'll consider that and that you have a blessed evening. Thanks and bye.